Hello, it's Michael Fortin, and welcome to another Ask Michel. I've been a marketing consultant for the better part of 30 years, and when I first started out, I was specializing in doctors, primarily cosmetic surgeons. If you know a bit about my history, I worked with a lot of hair transplant surgeons, for example. And fast forward to the last 10 years, last 5 years, I've worked in an agency and I've done SEO work as a director of communications. And one of the things that happened in the last couple of years that was a big impact in the world of Google search engine rankings is something called the MEDIC update. Now they call it the MEDIC update, but really what it is, it's called EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And essentially what they did is they didn't penalize, but they gave more juice, more, they recognized websites that had more authority and trust and elements that also proves they have expertise in what they're saying. And downgraded, or people that have less of those kind of lost a lot of rankings. And the reason why I brought it up in this show is because I talked last episode or two about meta messages. And the meta message is the message behind the message that either supports, contradicts, or enhances your message. And hopefully it either supports or at best enhances your core message. And the one thing that doctors can't do very often because of licensing regulations and whatnot is they cannot claim superiority. They cannot say they're better than their colleagues. So how do you do that? Of course, in the case of SEO, you can describe your expertise, authority, and trustworthiness through case studies, reviews, credentials, and so on and so forth. Content that's been fact-checked, that it's been sourced properly, that's been reviewed by a medical professional, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to marketing, and especially positioning and branding, we can do this rather than outright saying, I'm number one or I'm better than my competition. You can do this by implying the position. In fact, there's something that a mentor told me way back 30 years ago when I started out in marketing. He said, implication is more powerful than specification. So it is more powerful to imply that you're superior than to specify that you are. Now, doctors aside, if I were to say, I'm number one, or I'm the best, we have the highest quality, whatever the case is, your claim is kind of suspect. It seems boastful and self-serving. People won't really believe. They could, but it's hard to. But it would be far more credible, far more powerful, and far more believable if you implied it. You're not outright stating it. You're letting people interpret that. Like, for example, a meta message. And you can do that through myriad ways. Of course, we talk about, for example, credentials. There's such a thing as street cred being talked about on blogs, being commented on, having our blog posts shared on social media, having reviews. Even Google now pays more attention to brand mentions, for example. So the essence of what I'm trying to say is, when you want to express your authority, your expertise, you can do that through the power of implication by, let's say, labeling a new product or a service, even one that is done by many of your competitors, but as your own. It's unique. It appears unique. And that's what gives it the perception of superiority, even without stating it or claiming it outright. Here's an example. And one of the first clients that I've ever had was a hair transplant surgeon. And common back then was something called micrografting, and it was kind of a new and very popular method of doing hair transplants because the old plug technique was pretty obvious that somebody had a hair transplant done doing that technique, which is, was 50 years old, 60 years old. And micrografting is basically smaller, tiny little plugs so that when you transplant hair, it looks more natural. One doctor in particular created a process where he dissected the hair, and I apologize for being a little gross, but he dissected the hair under microscopes. And to the point where he would transplant them one hair at a time. In fact, he would transplant them using needles at an angle, so when hair would grow out, when the transplants were healing, it would look as if it was born with hair. And you really couldn't tell that it was a transplant. It was amazing. And he kind of labeled it as the gold standard in the hair transplant community or hair transplant industry. But again, you have to be careful in this case because competitors don't like when you claim superiority. So the way we did it was to rename the process. Now, this is not the real name. I'm using another name just so I don't want to identify him. But we called it, like, say, the microfollicular redistribution process, TM. And that way, it's not a hair transplant. It's not a micrograft. It is a microfollicular redistribution process, or microfollicles, or microfollicular grafts. And that way, he became known as the expert because he was the pioneer, the man behind this new process. Even though it was really new, it's just a different way of doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. And that way, he was able to charge higher fees and be known in his industry as a top surgeon, even though he didn't claim it. So this is something to think about in your communications, in your branding, in your positioning, in your content. The meta message you want to convey is one where you imply that superiority, the value of what you offer, and the quality of your work without saying we're highest quality or we're number one, whatever the case is. Hopefully this helps. If you like this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If not, go to my blog at michaelforn.com and click on articles, and then subscribe to my mailing list, and I will let you know whenever I upload these videos. If you have a question for me, ask on any of the socials, just hashtag AskMichel, and if I have time, I'll put it in the queue, and whenever I come across it, I will answer it in a future episode. Thank you so much.